Hello, incredibly, this is episode 12 of Idiot Wind as we bluster our way through the definitive vinyl collection of Mr. Bob Dylan. Wearing his resplendent 801 live t-shirt, it's Mr. Sidney Smith, currently sailing in a bathoscape through the oceans of Malaysia. I'm in Nottingham, so that's pretty boring. My name is Sean Hewitt, and today we're going to be discussing the 12th in our series, Bob Dylan's soundtrack to Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. And that's as much interesting commentary as you're going to get on this one. One of the things about, that's a very good picture there, the Magnificent magazine, that's Bob in a cowboy hat there. He's wearing a cowboy hat. In the film, which is directed by Sam Peckinpah, he plays a character called Alias. I've never seen the film. Have you seen the film, Sid?
No.
No. I think playing the album was enough for me. It was his first movie soundtrack, it says here. You might think from that statement that Bob's gone into a very productive career of movie soundtracks. You'd be wrong. This is basically the only full-length movie soundtrack Bob ever does. And I think he probably played the album when he got back and thought, yeah, done that now. I won't be doing any more of them. He went down to the filming locations for this film to see his mate Chris Christopherson. Basically, he made a new friend, Harry Dean Stanton, who he's very close to after this, and he managed to annoy Sam Peckinpah quite considerably, and also got roped in to doing the music. And this caused the pre-hired film composer to walk off the film in protest. And when you listen to this album, I think you might think he had a case there, particularly if he'd gone to the trouble of writing some music for the film. I think this is a very thin album indeed. For the most part, it's just people twanging their guitars as if they're about to start playing Knocking on Heaven's Door, which is the only, in my opinion, the only decent track on this record. That's a song that becomes a big part of Bob's subsequent catalogue. I'm not sure if he's ever played any of these other tracks in any context, in any concert ever. The number of variations of this track, Billy, is mind-bogglingly tedious, and they seem to be the same one every time. It seems to be a collection of people either tuning up or plangently playing, waiting for the recording session to start, and then that's the track. And there's some, Bruce Langhorne, who's played in a lot of Booker T's on this. Booker T is on this record. I think Roger McGuinn's on this, isn't he? Yeah, Roger McGuinn. Jim Keltner. There's some really big names on this. And they're all completely wasting the time. I think this is the most trivial Bob Dylan album. There's enough at a stretch to make an EP. But basically, this is very thin stuff. And I don't think it's even worthy of further discussion. What did you think of it, Sid?
Well, I thought it was a masterpiece.
Well, you're the contrary Mary of the Idiot Win podcast, aren't you? Whatever I say, you just say the opposite. That's the pattern. One week, I'm going to get you to start.
I'd not heard this album before, although like a lot of the population of the world of a certain age, I had heard knocking on heaven's door or whatever it's called, which I don't mind at all. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to find much in this album to like. It must be said. I mean, none of it's particularly offensive, and in my my sort of golden rule of Bob Dylan songbook, keep it short, get in, get out quick, and keep the lyrics down to a minimum if you don't mind. All of which he does on this album, it must be said. But it is thin stuff. I'm not even sure it's particularly. I must say I've not seen the movie, as you were saying. So maybe in the context of the film, it works really well. You know, I mean, maybe it illuminates parts of the character's soul which otherwise wouldn't be seen on screen. But so that's always a possibility. But yeah, it's thin stuff. I'm not even. I mean, I wouldn't go to bat on this issue, but it doesn't sound to me like there's an awful lot of Bob Dylan in it.
No.
It sounds to me like it's probably other people, and Bob might be there in the session and twangling along, but who knows? I mean, you know, maybe, I mean, as ever with these things, you know, every minute of Bob Dylan's life seems to be documented. So obviously people will be well placed to know if Bob Dylan was there and how active he was in all of these varied tracks that appear. But for me, it's thin stuff. You know, and there's not a lot to say about it if I'm honest.
No, and it's a good point you make. In one way, people will say, hang on a minute, you've not seen the film, you don't know how effective it is.
Yeah.
But, and that's fair enough criticism, but also this is being sold as an LP. And there are film soundtracks that you can listen to independent of the film and enjoy. I mean, sort of a lot of the Bernard Herrmann stuff, you know, there's a soundtrack I particularly like, which is the Fabulous Baker Boys, Dave Grusin soundtrack to that. That's a lovely little record. And Peter Gabriel's soundtrack for The Last Temptation of Christ works as a record in its own right. You do not have to seen that film to enjoy that record. I don't think there's much here. I don't think there's much. Those are all musical experiences. I don't think this is a particularly interesting musical experience, and that's what we're being asked to assess. It's an independent record on its own right, and it doesn't work, I don't think, as a record.
I mean, it's possible that one of the qualities of the record is there's an admirable sparseness to the sound, and there's a certain arid quality to it, which, not having seen the film, but you know, imagining most westerns take place in deserty type locations, or at least pretty bleak locations. So it may well be that the music works at that level. I'm thinking of, for example, Ry Cooder's Paris, Texas theme.
Oh, that's another great soundtrack.
It is, and it's very, you know, those opening bars for Paris, Texas have a kind of an incredibly evocative feel to it.
Yeah,
that works whether you've seen the film or not.
Yeah, or the work of Angelo Badalamenti with David Lynch. You could buy those as records, and they work as atmospheric pieces of music. I don't think there's much to compare with any of the soundtracks we've mentioned on this record. You know, I just think.
But what's interesting?
It doesn't work.
What's interesting is when, I mean, I'm assuming this came out in the very early 70s.
Oh yes, I think it's 71. I'm just double checking. Oh, 1973. Sorry.
Oh, right.
This is 1973. So there is quite a gap here for Bob. It's an arid period for his writing. I knew that, and yeah, this is 1973.
Okay.
I'm surprised by that. But, you know, the next studio album, not the next album we'll be discussing, is in 1974. So he's gradually, I think he's had 2 or 3 years away from the studio. And he's not been touring.
Yeah.
And he's trying to perhaps put his elbow in the water again.
The reason why I was interested in the timing of the release of the soundtrack was just how it compares to some of the other westerns that were being released, like at the end of the 60s, which kind of, you know, revisited the western as a genre, and made it, you know, kind of went into the existential crisis of the soul kind of areas. Again, I mean, Sam Peckinpah. I mean, what I've seen a couple of Sam Peckinpah movies, and I'm not sure those movies do that. But again, it might be a function of the discussion he had with Peckinpah that he comes with something that's very sparse, or it could simply be a conversation that went something along the lines of, "We've got this guy Bob Dylan in. Let's get him in because that'll be a bit of box office." Dylan's in it. A few Dylan fans are going to come along and see the movie because it's Bob Dylan's debut acting role. And more importantly, we'll shift a few units with the soundtrack, which is fine, I guess. So it's a kind of, on the one hand, it's a fairly blunt, cynical kind of bit of record company business, really. But artistically, even trying to find it on its merits. Having said all of that, where does a song like "Knocking on Heaven's Door" come from? Because that song, does worldwide business. I mean, it's a huge song. When Dylan finally pops his clogs, there'll be a big discussion about all of the great songs of Bob Dylan. And it may not be a great song by Bob Dylan, but it was an incredibly commercially popular song by Bob Dylan. So if for no other reason, the album which sires that song, I guess, is of interest to Bob Dylan fans.
No, to me that's the only interesting track. To me that's the only really replayable track.
Yeah,
and it's a familiar song. It's an atmospheric song, and it has atmosphere and interest that none of the other tracks do for me. I mean, just shortly before this, of course, they've got the Ennio Morricone music in spaghetti westerns, but I just don't think it's a very notable piece of work. That's it. I don't know.
Yeah. Usually on these things, it falls to me to say, "So, Sean, what's your favourite track?"
Knocking on Heaven's Door.
Well, that's come as a bit of a surprise. And then at some point,
that's my favourite track. Yeah.
And then at some point in the conversation, after you've witted on for a while, you then ask me, "So, Sid, what's your favourite track?"
What's your favourite track on this one, Sid?
It's Billy. No, it's "Knocking on Heaven's Door."
Well, that saved the space of a track on our eventual playlist, which we'll do our Idiot Win playlist of the breadth of Bob's career. It'll be "Knocking on Heaven's Door" from both of us on this one. So that's one track saved.
Yes. Yeah. Front cover, back cover. That be? I mean, that's quite a good cover image.
That's much better than the front. The front's dead boring.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is boring.
You have to wonder why. I mean, that looks like Chris Christopherson. I presume it is.
That is Chris Christopherson. Yeah. And he's being threatened with a big gun.
And this person is here to represent Sam Peckinpah, presumably.
Yeah. He's playing Sam Peckinpah. He's playing Sam Peckinpah, and Chris is playing Bob Dylan in that one. But you got, is that Edward J. Kell? Is that, or is that?
Anyway.
I don't know. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I'm just looking at the cast list. All right.
I thought you were just reading the paper.
I might do that in future weeks. Just put the paper behind the LP sleeve.
Well, can I say that? I mean, I think that probably brings this one to an end. And can I just say, I wish all of them were like this. It's
okay. You wished I hated them all.
No. In terms of brevity and succinctness, this is setting new standards, I feel, for our discussions. Right. So, what's next after this great album that we've just
dismissed? Well, the next one is a double LP. In episode 13, we'll be talking about Before the Flood, the double album. It's a live album of Bob Dylan and the band's 1974 tour, his big comeback onto the road. So that's the next one. It's not the next one chronologically, of course, but who expects that to be the case?